Captain Kahn is back.
Captain Karen Kahn has joined us again
Morning.
this morning. She's been on before. So
last time she was here was months ago. Tuned in CBS News the next night, and there you were.
Yeah.
Being interviewed for just about the same topic we had filled an hour on.
I think it was NBC, but you're right.
Maybe it was CBS or NBC. Safety, is that your specialty? You've retired now, right?
No, I actually have about another month and a half left.
Oh, are you still flying?
Still flying, coming down to the wire.
Whoa. Is it safe to say, or is it fair to say that there aren't many of you pilots that are female?
True, there's about 5%.
Okay.
And
why is that?
And Karen's one of the pioneers, too.
We've been trying hard to figure that out. I've actually been writing blogs, talking to friends and other women pilots, talking to young people as to why more women don't go into technical fields, one of them being aviation. So I'd love to hear from listeners on any ideas that they might have from the environment, from the family, from the technical bent to the issue of having a family when you do have this career, which there seems to be a misnomer that there is some misconnect between doing the two things, which is not the case. Yeah. So lots of interesting issues, and I'd be very interested to know why they think more women don't go into aviation.
Well, at the risk of being light with this Malaysian disaster or problem that's shaping up, that one of the, maybe, I wonder how many pilots have a full-fledged screen set up.
Simulator?
A simulator in their home.
Many do.
This pilot, really?
Not full-fledged like he had, but many pilots do have flight simulators.
And you practice with those. Okay.
Karen has one.
Sure. There's a lot of things. I use a very basic one and have for years because there's a lot of, we just had a long discussion when I was here back in January about automation and the whole issue of pilots getting rusty. So having a flight simulator on your computer lets you do some of the practice that you don't get enough of in everyday flying because mostly the weather isn't that terrible and you're flying above it. So going home and practicing some, climbs, turns, descents, instrument scan is very common.
What did the lady from Channel 3 come to interview you about last week? The Malaysian problem?
Yeah, she was there with the Malaysian situation. We also had a meeting of the Santa Barbara chapter of the 99s, which is the International Association of Licensed Women Pilots. Mm-hmm. And we just happened to be having our monthly meeting out at Above All Aviation. So,
why is it called the 99s again?
They actually had 99 founding members.
Oh, they did? Okay.
One of whom was Amelia Earhart.
Oh, my God.
Talk
about
who's still missing, by the way.
Yeah. Well, every so often somebody comes forward with a show on an upper cable channel. They think they know which island, and they held her captive, and the Japanese, and they got a piece of the airplane. And apparently it goes nowhere because you don't hear anything afterwards. She's still missing.
Yeah, Karen and I were talking about that very thing just a couple minutes ago in the green room about there's a fellow that she knows
Elgin Long, who wrote a very interesting book about his research on what could have likely happened to her, given his extensive experience as a navigator at the beginning of the Second World War and a subsequent Flying Tiger pilot who had a lot of oceanic experience. So it was quite interesting, his notion of what was a very likely occurrence if you were to run out of fuel and the physical positioning of the airplane and the person in it if it hits the water because you've run out of fuel.
So there's a consensus, is there not, that she kind of bit off more than she could. That last leg, she thought she'd hit that island, and or do they think she went somewhere else besides the route she was on, do you suppose?
I think her navigation was not the best due to the fact she didn't have the best equipment. Oh. Also, the ship that is transmitting to her, the Itasca, is sending Morse code, and of course, she does not have onboard equipment to read Morse code, nor can her navigator read Morse code.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Because the Itasca was all set up for her to go the other way. Remember, originally, the flight that Amelia started was going to go around the world to the west, and she flew to Honolulu, had a problem there with the airplane. They send it back to Los Angeles, they repair it, and during her test flight to Miami, the airplane's working so well that her support team suggests that she keep going and now do the trip around the globe the other direction to the east.
I see.
So
you're still flying.
I am.
What do you fly? Who do you fly for?
I say Continental, but now I'm supposed to say United Airlines, 36 plus years. and will be coming up on retiring here in May due to mandatory age 65 retirement.
But up until just recently, they've had the 707, 747, 737, 777s are relatively new, aren't they not?
They are, although the 787 is, of course, the very newest plane. So the 777 has been around for quite a number of years.
Do you fly one? Have you ever flown one?
No, I don't, and I haven't. And my reason is I don't really like long-range flights.
Oh.
You know, I jokingly say I do the North Atlantic in first class with a drink in my hand.
I see.
Because I like to sleep at night, and the 777 is renowned for its long-range abilities. So the flights can range anywhere from 8 to 16 hours in a 777.
And so it would be comparable to a 1011 or a DC-10 as a wide body?
Yeah.
The biggest is 747, aren't they? Because they got the hump on the top, three levels, if you will.
The A380 now, the French Airbus.
Oh, that monster Airbus.
Yeah. That'll seat like in the maximum configuration, 525 or something. It's quite a big.
Quite a sardine can.
Yeah. Well, I think it's designed a lot for the Asian routes where, you have a lot of people on flights and smaller in stature. So, they probably fit them in there with no problem.
Well, Captain Kahn, last time you were here, it was a great hour, a riveting show. But unfortunately, I'm suffering from since I got my degree and I don't have to do homework anymore. I don't have to pound stuff into my brain. So a lot of it went away. It was airline safety, was it not?
I think we were talking about safety. I think we also talked some about automation. We had the Asiana event in San Francisco, I think, and we were discussing perhaps some of that. Basically trying to help people understand, because aviation is kind of a fascination for most everyone.
Oh, sure. How did the network find you? Are you noted? Is she common knowledge? This is the expert. This is the lady that.
Well, she does a lot of speaking.
Okay.
Has her own blog and has been in aviation for a long time. She's out in the front, being visible, and people go to her.
How do we find that blog? Can we read it?
You can. It's on my website, CaptainKarenKahn.com.
K-A-H-N?
Uh-huh.
K-A-H-N, okay.
And then if you look up at the top, you'll see, I think it's /blog, but there's a link up to the top to the blog.
Are they all on there? Do you keep them, or do you take them?
Oh, yeah, they're
down?
there. One of the interesting issues we've been talking about is why aren't there more women pilots?
Yes.
So there's a thread on that. And then, of course, I've recently been writing about automation. And, it can be good, it can be bad. It just depends how you use it. And that, I think, is really the key, the appropriate use of automation. When to turn it on, when to turn it off, when to decide that it's not doing what you want it to do, and thus make sure you take over.
But most big airlines on long flights anyway do use it at the high altitude.
Oh, very definitely. An airliner is very difficult to fly by hand, and probably the professional pilot's greatest nightmare is to have to spend hours aloft with an inoperative autopilot and actually sit there and physically keep the airplane at the precise altitude, at the precise speed.
Oh.
That's why we have 3 autopilots. So ideally, if one doesn't work, there are at least 2 left that do.
Well, what was your point? They should take over every so often, or?
No, my point was that particularly in the more complex phases of an approach, there's a point at which you have to decide that the airplane is not doing what you want it to. And instead of trying to fix the automation by punching another button to see if it will now to go do what you'd like it to do, turn it off and fly it manually.
Gotcha.
And don't be afraid to turn it off. I had a situation about 2 weeks ago where we ended up unexpectedly in San Francisco, and I, as the pilot flying, was given a very expeditious route to the runway. We had a passenger who was ill. And if I had used all the automation, which actually is based on having a very pre-planned plan on how to get to the runway, but if somebody's going to expedite it and says turn right now, the fastest and most expeditious way to do it is manually. So you recognize that. You say the automation is never going to do this in the proper time frame that I need it to do it, and I'm the decider of that fact. Right. So I will turn it off, and I will fly the airplane manually and make it do what it needs to do.
But takeoffs and landings are manually anyway, are they not?
Takeoffs are manual. The landings have become highly automated when the weather's bad because they found that the automation can actually, when it's working and monitored properly, can do a very good, very precise job, much better than people can. We just watch it.
Would it have saved those people on that Asiana Airlines that crashed at the end of the runway in San Francisco if they had not taken it off?
In this particular case, the automation that comes from the ground to assist in a totally automated landing was not functioning that day.
Oh,
so that
right.
they weren't able to use it.
So they had to bring it in by the seat of their pants, as they say.
But, they have now changed procedures, and at San Francisco, they now are told to give non-U.S. airlines the straight-in vanilla electronic-assisted approach to the runway, so there is not an opportunity for that kind of challenge to occur.
When you're flying high during the flight, you're up there at the height of the flight, as high as you go, I guess, and it is on automatic, and you take it off to do a little, a refresher to keep up. Can you feel it? Does the aircraft
That is
shake?
probably not something you would actually do. It's
that's not what you do.
I won't say it's unstable, but if you're going to do hand flying, typically people will do it at low altitude where, one, you've got the opportunity to do something either than minute quarter-inch corrections. You've got the opportunity to actually make some turns and to actually initiate some descents. So that type of practice, if you want to say, never occurs at altitude unless there's a problem and you need to do something to assist the automation in doing a better job.
There is a window. There's a reason for that. As I understand it, I never did fly high altitude. Me, I'm low and slow. The envelope or the window, if you will, between stall speed and cruise speed narrows at high altitude. Is that correct, Karen?
It does.
So it's harder to fly manually because if you get a little bit too slow or you get a little bit too fast, you get into trouble. And that's was brought home in the U2s and the SR-71s. The window up there is even more narrow between stall. I think it's something like 5 or 10 knots. It's really, really narrow.
Wow.
And if you go too fast, the nose tucks and the plane comes apart. If you go too slow, it stalls and falls. So I think that's probably one reason that commercial pilots at 36,000 feet, whatever, do not fly manually unless they really had to. They pretty much.
I remember years ago we had a flight out of Mexico City, I think, up to San Diego. And when the autopilot wasn't functioning properly. And when we got to altitude, the joke is it's the co-pilot's leg if the autopilot doesn't work, because, of course, he gets to hand fly it.
Oh, really?
And unfortunately, at that point, one of our engines quit. It was a 2-engine McDonnell Douglas MD-80. So we got to turn around and go back into Mexico City, which is a difficult approach to begin with because of all the high mountains surrounding
I've heard that.
the place and the high altitude. Mm-hmm. But I remember thinking, obviously the dumbest words I've ever said is, I've got it. So I, of course, got to fly the airplane on one engine while the co-pilot was busy doing all the rest of the work, and found how much of my brain power was taken up with just the basics of the airplane, not to mention monitoring what we were doing to properly shut down the other engine and get all of the procedures in place that would allow us to return to Mexico City. And I thought back and said, wouldn't it have been nice to have had the autopilot working? Because we use it a lot in situations where it can do what is a very routine, good job, and relieves us to focus our attention on other things. In this case, the fact that we had one engine and you've got to shut off all the, the hydraulics, the fuel, all the things that go to that other engine that now isn't working.
Yeah.
So it splits your concentration between keeping the airplane upright and, of course, having to deal with the fact that you've now got a very different reacting airplane because it's got some concerns.
So what are you advocating? When do they get to take it off?
I think
Manual.
more, it's a judgment call. I, for example, like to hand fly the airplane up to 18,000 feet after takeoff if there is nothing intervening that really requires my attention. On the other hand, on approach, I'm somebody who says my goal is to give the passengers the best, smoothest ride possible. And for the most part, the best ride is done by the autopilot unless it decides, as it did in the case of my San Francisco story, to not do what I want it to do. And I will not go into heroics of trying to punch, 5 buttons just to make it get what I want. I'll say, the easiest thing is this little red button here that says autopilot disconnect, because I still know how to push and pull and turn, and that's where I think you do a much better job. It's really an individual thing. So if it's passenger comfort, and the airplane can do a much better job on the autopilot many times than a pilot can, I say that's the primary. I happen to fly light airplanes as well, so I get a fair amount of practice doing that. And I have a simulator at home.
You do. That little red button you were describing, is it on the stick, similar to our cruise control? Isn't that on your steering wheel?
Yeah, it's on the yoke.
It's right there. You just push it. Does it light up, or does the light go out?
No, you get a very loud warning that says autopilot's off. So you get usually a horn that warns you that you have turned the autopilot off, and then you cancel it. If you have initiated the turning off of the autopilot, you will get all this noise, and then you'll cancel it. If you have not initiated it and it were to turn itself off on its own for some reason, then it warns you that you've got a situation where the autopilot is not flying the airplane like you thought it was.
I see. I don't know how much of the Malaysian tragedy that's developing you want to talk about, but something I've learned, even if it's not true and it's just them conjecturing, was that if it flew below radar, they're saying, it would have taken more gas. And it's like, I wonder, is it different down here where the air is thicker? Does it take more gasoline?
Mm-hmm. More fuel.
Can you put your earphones on? We'll see if this is for us. And I think we got a call, even though I don't give the number out enough. I'll give you permission to clear your throat there, Richard, but good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Ron Herron. This is AM 1290's History of Aviation and High Tech Monday. You turn the knob up right where it plugs in.
Testing, testing.
They turn it down.
Testing, testing.
Should have checked it out before. Hi, Richard. You're talking to Captain Karen Kahn and Joe Danely and myself.
Morning, Richard.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Captain.
Good morning.
During the French flight from South America, I think Brazil, I believe that I heard someone say on the radio that the cockpit was probably filled with buzzers and beepers and horns and claxtons, and my response in my head was, that might be confusing to have 5 different things going off at the same time. I wonder if you've got opinions about the alerts that are audible and whether they can be disconcerting, or whether you think they're the right volume, loudness, or they should be a little softer, or do you have opinions about that?
Well, the good news that in my 36-plus year career, I have rarely heard those, except in the simulators. So, yes, they can certainly be disconcerting, because your first reaction to, let's say, the first single one is, why did it do that? And, of course, you're trained to cancel the warning, which you can easily do. If you were to get multiple ones, it's just that much more disconcerting. So it's a real problem. The question, of course, is how many were going off? Is that something maybe that is so rare, and you can't always train for everything? So one of the questions here would be, in a simulator session, might you want to simulate more than one warning? And, of course, having them as a, should we say, surprise event is going to compound the complexity of the situation. This reminds me of a simulator session I actually had probably 10 years ago when they were simulating a flight, and they were actually simulating somebody breaking into the cockpit, or actually, I think the simulation was a hijacker on board, and the check pilot actually had a cap gun, and he actually shot the cap gun to make the noise to startle us, to add more realism to the fact that we now had a very distressing, and serious situation.
Whoa.
So I remember saying to the co-pilot, remember, there's nothing that you and I can do that's going to help what's going on behind that cockpit door, except for us to get you and me on the ground safely. Consequently, here's the plan I propose. Tell me what you think. We can't get up and go back there. We're not going to help anything. The only thing we can do is concentrate on what we need to do. So a lot of those noises need to be taken into perspective, and you need to refocus yourself on what's important to do.
Okay, so I was right and they were right to point it out that maybe it was pretty noisy up there and that would be disconcerting. About 10 years ago, there was one news story about the so-called black box. And it said it's not an up-to-date black box, and that it would be expensive to upgrade it, but it would be a good idea. That's the best way I can remember it. And then I never heard about it again. And so the Malaysian flight reminded me of that. Has that been addressed by the aircraft industry, or is it just not really a subject people talk about?
I'm sure if you Googled flight data recorders and read up on how many parameters they measure, you would find that it's all pretty much government regulation. The FAA will specify what, for example, American airliners have to have in terms of what kind of a flight data recorder and how many parameters they have to record. So it's airlines in general, given the fact they tend to bleed red in terms of their financial position, are hesitant to put anything new into their airplanes that they don't have to. And a lot of things have been mandated by safety, so what they have is usually state-of-the-art and what's required.
Something I've been hearing in the story, they're covering everything they can. They got to fill these hours on the networks, is that the power is about to go out. It's only got a day or two more. And I'm wondering, why is that important? It's recorded. It's there, right? If it's on the bottom of the ocean somewhere, does it send out a ping? Is that where?
I think they're talking about the emergency locator transmitter that will only work for so many days, because the assumption is that under normal circumstances, you would be found by that time.
You don't check those out when you get on a plane, do you? You don't see those. They're buried somewhere in the
That's
fuselage.
Right. Correct.
Captain Kahn and Joe and myself will be back, and Richard might even be back.
No, I am going to hang up.
All right. Well, that's what he said.
Thank you for talking, Captain.
9:30. We'll be back. Don't go away.
We'll just fly.
Okay, with Frank in the background, and Joe, and our special guest once again, Captain Herron Kahn, who was here, how many months ago? It's been?
January, I think.
January,
Yeah.
Lord.
And wasn't too long ago.
Sounds like you don't mind doing this. You love getting the word out. Who contacted you from, well, if it was NBC, I forget who was the correspondent, the host, or the reporter? Came to town, actually drove up here?
No, actually, that was quite interesting. They actually called me, and he was in New York, and they contracted with a local firm. I think it was Tom Piazza of Home Planet Productions, who's a cameraman, and we met out at the airport. And I was actually being interviewed with a cell phone in front of me, which is why it's amusing, because the reporter was talking to me via cell phone. He was still in New York.
Is that right? Yeah. Were you seeing him on the screen on the cell phone?
No, I couldn't see him, and of course I was looking right into the sun, and Tom, bless his heart, was busy trying to get me to be a little more animated while I was squinting into the sun, because we were trying to get some airplanes in the background.
And forgive me, refresh my memory, what was the problem at the time that was making news that you
It,
commented
it was
on?
the automation
Oh,
issue.
automation.
I think it was the Asiana. Is that?
Okay, after the Asiana flight. God, so many different ways to go here. You know, the drones that you saw and you didn't happen to catch, but maybe you have some opinions on drones. FAA is about to start regulating them, and all it takes is one jet to suck one into its engine, and they're gone, probably. Grounded.
Well, most of these little quadcopters is what they were focusing on the program last night, are at much lower altitude, and much like radio-controlled airplanes. You know, they don't really get up very high, although they can, you know, be a problem, but I think the majority of the time they're not.
Well, you know something else that I'm not sure if the FAA can legislate against them, but it's just a matter of time.
Oh, sure, because...
No, I'm talking about a totally different thing, lasers.
Yeah. The laser's a much bigger problem from the ground.
Yeah.
And a potential threat to an airliner, because that does have the long-range reach that the little drones at this point are not
The pointers.
concerned.
Mm-hmm.
My granddaughter had one in her hand months ago, a couple of years ago, and flashed it at me, and it did have a...
Yeah.
Didn't hurt me or anything, but it...
Yeah, they should keep those to amuse their cats and not point them at airliners. But before we really get too far into the second phase here, I do want to make one administrative announcement.
Okay.
I got the latest launch schedule from Vandenberg a couple nights ago, and there will be a military weather satellite launched on April 3rd. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Military weather.
It's a military weather satellite. It will lift off an hour after sunrise, and this time they have a 10-minute launch window, which is kind of unusual. That's kind of long, but from 7:46 a.m. to 7:56 a.m.
Okay.
So that'll be April 3rd. So if the weather's clear, should be quite visible.
All the Vandenberg launches are polar orbits, aren't they?
Yes.
By definition or
Except for the
practicality?
missile tests where they go downrange the Pacific.
Westerly.
Yeah.
And
But
all the
satellite
Canaveral,
launches, yeah.
Canaveral are that
Equatorial.
sine wave around the Earth, around the midsection. Interesting stuff. All right, we'll be monitoring that situation.
And there are some other ones coming up this year, but I don't have any times or dates on them yet.
Your 99s club, Captain, is it all women?
Yeah, it's the International Association of Licensed Women Pilots, and we have a chapter here in Santa Barbara.
How often do you meet?
Usually once a month.
Are there any other commercial pilots like yourself in there?
Oh, yes, we have, several other airline pilots. We have local commercial pilots, charter pilots.
Are you an officer with the organization, or have you been?
Oh, I have been, and
Okay.
I'm the membership chair, so I'm always eager to hear from women who are pilots who might like to join us, because it's an interesting opportunity to get to know other women who fly as well.
Sure. Then we have EAA.
Yep.
Experiment. Are you a member of that as well?
I member the local chapter and have attended a number of their meetings.
What's the other group that I heard about?
Santa Barbara Flying Club, is that the
That's
one?
not the one I'm thinking of, but it'll do. It was something rather catchy or not.
Oh, I know what you mean. The guys that meet...
Quiet Birdman?
No, not the QBs. The...
SAA?
SAA, yeah, Serious About Aviation.
Oh, okay, maybe that's the one.
They used to meet at the Elephant Bar on the first Friday of the month for
Yeah,
lunch.
now it's Marmalade since the Elephant Bar is no more.
Oh, Marmalades has moved in there?
No, they haven't moved in there. I mean, I'd love it
They
if...
meet at Marmalades now.
Oh,
because the E-Bar
Elephant Bar is
closed.
closed.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'd love to see Marmalade open a second restaurant in
Elephant Bar?
the Elephant Bar
You like
location.
Marmalade?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
good.
that's Frank Robinson and his group. That
Yeah.
we've had Frank in here before.
And if you don't mind my asking about your schedule, how many flights a week and what flights?
Well, they actually have just recently changed the regulations, but in general, people would typically fly 3, maybe 4 days a week. And people who fly longer flights get to fly fewer of them and, of course, go away for a longer time. There are as many as 5 or 6 day trips.
What do you do when you reach altitude and the thing kicks in? You're automatic. Do you get sleepy ever, or do you read?
You
just check things?
Well, the nice thing is all of our manuals now are on an iPad. So it's very easy to look stuff up by looking at the iPad and, instead of carrying manuals, which, weigh 40, 50 pounds a bag. So our backs and our necks and our knees are really thankful that you don't have to carry quite that amount of weight anymore. But the procedures, in the United States, of course, you're in constant voice communications. So you're making reports. There's obviously the PA to the passengers. There's checking the instruments to make sure that things are going smoothly. There are planning routes, deciding whether or not you'd like to go here or there. If you've got weather, you've got a lot to do because, of course, you're looking to deviate around it. Frequently, what the most concern is, it's getting bumpy. Let's ask the controller if it's going to be bumpy up ahead. Let's ask them if there's a smooth altitude, higher or lower. Can we go higher? We have to check the computer. No, we can't go higher. Okay, how long is this going to last? Would you ask somebody down at 36,000 feet as to whether or not it's smooth down there? What kind of headwind are they getting? We're getting 120 knots on the nose. That's going to slow us down a lot. We're going to be late. Should we go faster to try to make up the time? If we go down lower, we'll burn more fuel, but the headwind may not be as bad, so we may be able to make up the more fuel burned issue with the I can go faster.
Ah.
So you've got a lot of things you're considering, and hopefully everything is working just as it should, because if it's not, then you're looking at those concerns. Okay, maybe we may have a light on here. What does that mean? Do we have to report that? Is there a problem with it? Can we fix it? Oh, the flight attendants just called. She said somebody wants to know what we're flying over. Well, okay, what are we flying over? We tend not to make, public address announcements as to where we are because these days usually the movies are running.
Oh.
And they don't want us to interrupt them.
Gotcha.
So,
Part-time scenic tour operator.
So there's a lot of things that keep you busy. It's a different situation if you're flying over water. Long-range flights have a lot of reporting to do in terms of measuring parameters, checking to make sure that you're on course properly, that this particular heading matches with this one, that the amount of gas you've burned at this point is correct and matches up with what you had projected to burn. So there's no lack of things to do.
Richard had mentioned earlier a while ago the buzzes and clicks and whistles that go off if something is not right. And you just mentioned a light going on.
Yeah, warning lights, yeah.
Pretty much everything that's around you, and there's a jillion things there to check from oil pressure to electrical, whatever, headings, has something to tell you, right? If it's off, as opposed to my car, I don't know if the engine's heating unless I look down at the damn thing. It doesn't throw off a light or buzzer.
Yeah, there's the great majority of the warning issues are lights. Obviously, if they were all bells and whistles.
Oh, it would be a
And of course,
symphony,
the light is something, it's usually enunciated. It will say,
oh, I see, spelled out on the screen.
It'll actually come up on the screen and read to you, left hydraulic pressure low, if that were the problem. And you would then get out the book and start reading about what do you do when you have that light. Maybe the pump isn't working, so it says, So then you have one person assigned to fly the airplane, and the other person starts reading through what's called a QRH, or a quick reference handbook, and you start reading the exact instructions for what to do with that particular situation.
And sometimes they can be fault signals too.
Fault signals?
Yeah, if you can get a warning light. I know we had a chip detector light come on when I was in the military.
Chip detector.
Yeah, they're a little magnetic plug. This particular one was in the tail rotor gearbox, which is lubricated. And if for some reason it starts throwing off metal, it'll be attracted to this little magnetic plug. And when enough metal builds up, the annunciator light will come on and tell you you may have a problem. Your tail rotor gearbox is about ready to let go. So our tail rotor gearbox chip detector light came on, and of course that raised concern. You don't want to lose your tail rotor, particularly when we were close to the airport getting ready to land. We had another, 15, 20 miles to go, so I elected to monitor it and keep in the back of my mind to keep my airspeed up in case the tail rotor did go.
Wow.
And make a run on landing rather than try to come to a hover. As it turned out, by the time we got to the airport, I still had tail rotor authority, and so I made a typical landing. And as it turned out, I'm not sure why that thing came on, but it was kind of either just a little tiny bit of, it was not a real big issue, but it came on, we had to deal with it.
You know, one of the things, Captain Kahn did not see that piece, but they'll probably run it again, and a lot of times.
Quadcopters?
60, yeah. Well, last night, they showed a full-fledged helicopter, but the windows were gone, replaced by dark panels. And he said, this is kind of weird. Yeah. They have a full-fledged helicopter. I guess it's going to be a medevac and transporting without...
The Navy has them now. I forget the name of them, but they are drone helicopters that are on the carriers and on some of the larger ships that they use for anti-submarine patrol. And apparently you don't need a pilot to just sit there and fly it. You can program this thing to fly a certain area and to come back, and all the equipment on board will do all the listening and hunting for submarines.
Well, in that case, it doesn't have to be that big if there's no person on board. This would transport people, victims, traffic.
Yeah, it was it looked like a Jet Ranger.
It looked like
a Long Ranger.
Just didn't have windows, and the guy, whoever the reporter was, said, "This is rather weird to look at a helicopter that doesn't have a pilot." Which leads me to my question: do you foresee the day that somebody that's in the cockpit is just there as a tender, just checking it out and letting the whole flight be run by a computer? Is that possible?
We have the joke that one day there will be a pilot and there'll be a dog. And the dog will be there to bite the pilot when he falls asleep.
Or when he tries to mess with a computer.
Exactly. So,
whoa.
You know, it's so hard to say. There's so much development that none of us are privy to, and probably rightly so. So that the notion that there are pilotless airplanes, I don't know that the public would ever accept it. So that I think, you know, high degrees of automation will come, and a lot of the tasks that, you know, even now, a lot of the tasks that were previously, you know, things that pilots needed to do. I mean, let's take a flight across the Pacific to Hawaii. You know, right now, if we have an airplane that isn't equipped with specific equipment, we have to make a report every hour, and we use a high-frequency radio, which is pretty hard to understand. Some of the ones that have the more sophisticated equipment, which some of our airplanes do, you just push a button and it sends out an electronic signal that gives them the same altitude we're flying at, you know, the estimated time we're passing the next point and what's the next reporting point, and that the weather seems to be good. And so the basic stuff that's pretty rote that can be automated, that can be done better by automation, I think you'll definitely see being covered by automation.
Otherwise, it's not a big pain in the butt, is it? Would you like to be in control of the whole flight?
Well, theoretically, you are in control.
Yeah, I guess.
You know, having to do routine, rote things, you know, it's more, what should we say, a case of, well, I have to wait for 3 other guys to make their report till I can make mine. And if I have the button that I can push, great, it gets done. So I don't think it's really a chore. It's more a case of, oh, isn't that cool? It does it for you, and it does it accurately, and it knows when to do it, so it hasn't forgotten, and it's not 10 minutes late with its report. It's not human. So, you know, I think it's a good advancement because there's lots of other things that we could be doing.
When you take off at a jet and you push that throttle forward, eventually, I guess, all the way, it doesn't just go real fast. So you're increasing the power, and you're going down the runway, and then you're taking off, and when you reach the cruising speed, does it back off? Do you pull it back, or does it stay at that full throttle?
Well, the cool thing is we have automatic throttles.
Oh, they're automatic
so
throttles.
So what we do on takeoff is push the throttles up to a predetermined, fairly low power setting, and then we ask for auto throttles on, and the other guy or gal punches the button that turns on the automatic throttles, and they by themselves advance slowly and smoothly to a very nice predetermined power setting that's based on the weight of the airplane. And at that point, we monitor it and decide if they have given us the exact amount of power. The airplane starts to roll. And of course, when we lift off, it's all handled automatically. With automatic throttles, you don't actually have to physically move them yourself. You're watching them, the gauges that record what they're doing, we're watching them to make sure that they do accurately what we need to do.
The same throttle handle that you use as the captain with your right hand, the co-pilot can also do it if something were to happen to you.
Oh, right. He operates them with his left hand.
Okay. We would be remiss, I guess, if we don't say something about the Malaysian problem here.
Yeah, I just wanted the last 10 minutes to get into that.
What is it that you believe? You were mentioning earlier off the air, I'm not sure we got this on the air, that there's so much conjecture. They're coming up with all kinds of crazy, stupid, silly, half-baked theories, even getting into the realm of the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs and conspiracies. What do you believe so far? What do we know?
Well, one of the things I try to point out is that, no offense to the press, but rampant speculation obviously sells airtime.
Yeah.
And consequently, it also provides for the public instant gratification. Mm-hmm. And I think the press feels the public expects or even demands instant gratification, which is some form of information. With that in mind, the problem is aviation is not an instantly solvable conundrum. There are an awful lot of things that happen that, one, we never hear about, two, we never know the results of or know what happened. I mean, we're still talking about Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
In 1983, when Korean Airlines 007 went down in September, it was quite some time, I don't recall the exact time, before we figured out what had happened, but it too disappeared. So I think the public's expectations of knowing everything immediately need to be tempered with, we'd much rather have a wait and see and let's go about this in a reasonable manner. I mean, conjecture is the stuff that great movies are made of. And I'm as much a fan as great whodunit spy stories, or, James Bond was the master of, who was it, Goldfinger, who would snatch rockets out of the sky, and, so.
Moonraker.
Yeah, all of those. Well, all of this. He had a marvelous thing, it was islands in the Pacific that opened up and grabbed airplanes. And, who knows?
Who knows what happened?
It's really tough to say, and my thought is that because it's been otherwise a slow news week, this event gets a lot more attention than it would had something else occurred to kind of distract the press into thinking, let's just let it go. When the time is right, we'll get the information, and when we have some realistic information to give you, we'll provide it.
Joe, what's your take?
Well, pretty much the same. We're still trying to get the facts and trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And it may take 2 months or 2 years before we really find out what happened. But in the meantime, you need to really kind of stick with what you know and not throw all these far-out conspiracy theories and stuff that just it muddies the water, and people run around and say, God, I heard so-and-so, I heard such and such. And it just, there's no facts to back it up.
The problem is later we don't come back and say, oh, none of that was true. I want to retract all those strange things that I said. Later down line when they actually come up with the actual facts on it, the only thing people tend to remember is the sensationalism that accompanied it at the beginning.
True, but on the other hand, they are using facts sent to them by the authorities that would know. For example, it did apparently turn back.
Yeah.
And now they say the announcement saying goodnight was done after that happened, apparently.
Well, that was done supposedly after the transponder was turned off.
Oh, turned off. That's what it was. Yeah. I'm sorry. And now they say it was a day or two after it went missing. We thought it just fell into the sea there, between Malaysia and Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then they just determined that there's a ping that it kept picking up for 4 hours.
Yeah, but they're not. I don't think anyone said that absolutely certain it came from that aircraft. I think aircraft are sending that information.
Don't they know if they can put a little thing in a dog's
there
back?
There should be something that says what aircraft it's from. But
right.
A couple of the experts, so-called experts, have said that they really haven't determined it was exactly from that airplane. And because there's no debris, a couple of the experts really are throwing out, again, theories that, it could...
well, these are possibilities. It could have gone down below radar, could it not? But it takes more gas to fly it
Yeah, at a lower altitude, it's not as jet engines
5,000
aren't as
or
efficient
less?
as they are at high altitude. So, it
Okay.
wouldn't, but still, those airplanes have a huge range. I think they were speculating that with the number of passengers on board, the distance it had to go, it probably could have flown 7,000 miles or something.
Yeah, but that's at altitude. And of course, the amount of fuel the airplane burns when you get down low is substantially higher than what it burns at altitude, which
Why is that? There's more air.
Oh, well, air, the proper mixture for combustion in a jet engine and in the, any engine happens to be the ratio of air to fuel. As the air gets thinner, you use less fuel to keep the same ratio.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So at high altitudes, we use a lot less fuel than we do at low altitudes. And it's always interested me that there were times when we had very strong headwinds, let's say on a flight from Houston to Los Angeles, where they would actually program us to fly at a lower altitude, let's say 26,000 feet, instead of 36,000, because at 26,000 the headwind was only 50 knots. At 36,000 it was 136 knots.
Jeez.
And the extra fuel you burned down lower was well made up for what you might burn up at altitude, but at altitude the headwind was so bad that if you can get out of the headwind and go fast down low, and you can actually fly faster at a lower altitude, you would actually get there sooner. So that's a lot of what we do, is set out and figure out what gets us there the closest to our scheduled arrival time.
Back in Amelia Earhart's days, they didn't have the transponders, did they?
No, had virtually nothing. My understanding is that her airplane didn't even have a seatbelt in it.
Are you kidding me?
No,
I would
seatbelts
think that'd
didn't come in, and certainly for passengers, they didn't come in to being, I'm guessing, until the late 50s, because I think it was the Airline Pilots Association that, mandated them, because the airline companies didn't want to scare the passengers by giving them seatbelts to make them think that there was anything.
Oh, okay. Like school buses.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a cost factor there, too, interestingly enough. Did they have parachutes? You guys don't have parachutes.
Oh, of course not, no.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, some newer light airplanes do actually have a parachute. I think the...
Talking about the ballistic parachute?
No, I'm talking about the Cirrus. I think they actually have a parachute built into the tail as a...
A ballistic
I've heard
parachute.
that, yeah. It's a big parachute that would bring the plane down if something happened and it lost.
Yeah.
Well, it would allow you to survive the impact if you had some catastrophic failure. Say you threw a piston or something and the engine became so imbalanced it ripped itself off the mounts, or even came off the aircraft, and you'd be totally out of CG. You could pull this handle and a chute would automatically deploy. And
Is that extra? Is that it's not a frill or a...
well, like Karen said, there is one aircraft.
Oh.
I think it's an option. I think you can get it.
What's an option?
As an option, yeah.
Oh, be
It's
darned.
expensive, but
If you need it, it's great to have
yeah.
it.
Or if you got, like I think one of the scenarios, if you're in weather and it's raining and storming and you've got lightning and all of a sudden you're spatially disoriented and the airplane starts to go in a spin and you're going to go down and you've got vertigo and you're completely disoriented, they're saying you can just, pull back the throttle and deploy that chute, but that's... You're supposed to be able to get out of that.
I think it's a little too late to take a call from Richard. He's waiting the
Yeah, we
last
keep
2
forgetting
minutes.
to get the number out as well.
It's all right. You remind me, or you can say it.
I should, yeah. I'm going to...
We found the Titanic at 2 miles down in the Atlantic like 80 years or so after it went down, after that disaster.
My roommate found that.
Okay, that's
college
another show.
roommate,
Oh,
yeah.
your college roommate. Do you think maybe since it was much later than 1912 that Amelia disappeared, we might be able to find her plane sometime?
Oh, I think so. I think there's a number of efforts looking in the right areas. I think it's a case of money. Is anybody willing to finance the expeditions to look in the places that haven't been searched? Because I think that's what I think Elgin Long has been looking to do, and of course raising the funds to do it, with some pretty good information as to why his areas seem to be better ones to search.
And as far as Malaysian flight
370.
What's your own gut feeling? It went down?
Well, it's on the ground or in the sea, I think is the issue. It's obviously not still in the air. And who's to say? There are so many possibilities that I'm willing to wait and see and hope for the best.
Well, it sure has enraptured us.
Yeah.
And it's sure good to have you on board again. We get
Thank you.
for a whole hour. NBC got her for like 2 minutes.
Thank you, Karen.
I wanted to ask what you said to the local Channel 3 and what Tracy Lair, was she the one?
Yes, I think it was.
That's
Okay.
what- We've run out of time. We're going to have you back.
Great,
And
I'll
we're
be
gonna
back.
Sign up some ladies for the 99 Club. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.